Good morning, Rockingham, and welcome to the feed. Here we are on the 28th of November. We've been through Thanksgiving, but today we're going to actually revisit Thanksgiving in a more traditional manner, and we're going to talk about Native American foods, and we're with Chris Bergman, who's going to help us go through some of the things that he has worked through and worked with people about Native American foods. First, we're going to have Marty tell us about some local events.
And we have new technology today. Mike's
Yeah,
on
we're
the
doing.
technology.
We're trying to do some technology things here,
Scary.
so we'll see if that works.
So the first event is what a lot of people have been wondering when it's going to happen is the Bellows Falls Community Christmas, which is the annual movie that Rotary Club sponsors at the Opera House. It's this Saturday. The movie starts at 2 o'clock, and the movie is Hotel Transylvania 3. Not 1 or 2, but 3.
But 3.
And then the thing that's going to be different this year is normally after the movie, the kids come downstairs to the women's club meeting room, and they have cookies and punch, and then they visit with Santa. But this year, we're actually going to move that portion of it to the American Legion post.
Oh, really?
So people will have to walk from the movie theater to the Legion, but there's a lot more room in the Legion. The problem's always been that it gets kind of
backed up
the stairs,
and
kids are waiting, and there's no place to sit, and so we're going to move it to the Legion. So there'll be refreshments at the Legion afterwards. And we've also been asked by the merchants to just remind people that are coming to the movie to try to park down at the Waypoint Center or park, not in the square, because it is the height of the local shopping season for the local merchants. And when you're parked there for 2 hours for the movie, it prohibits a lot of business for the downtown merchants. So we could ask just people to be a little more cognizant of that. And then if you're looking for something to do to shake your tail feather on Saturday night, Wonder Bar is having Wonder Groove Dance Party.
With disco, pop, funk, hip hop, and R&B.
What more could you want?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Maybe some country line dancing?
Maybe some country line dancing. But other than that, I think it's going to be fun. All right, and on to Native American.
Oh, are we ready?
Intrigued. We're ready. I'm intrigued by all of the things you've brought today, Chris.
So, Chris, tell us about this.
Okay, well, first of all, I think before we get going, since we are going to be talking about Native American foods, it's important to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, and that would be the Native American nations in the United States and the First Peoples nations in Canada. Mm-hmm. And we should especially acknowledge the Abenaki people whose land this is. So we'll start there, and then I'll give you a little bit of my own history. I got interested in Native American foods because of my background in pre-contact, or as we say in Europe, prehistoric archaeology. In other words, how did our ancestors prepare foods? How did they preserve them? What were these foods like? And there were two things that really kind of impacted me. One was a postal worker that moonlighted as sort of a janitorial person in the place where I worked. His name was Andy, and I don't know where Andy is anymore, but Andy once said to me, he said, Chris, if only people took to one another the way they take to one another's food. and I thought that was really a wonderful sentiment, that everybody sits down and eats different kinds of foods and enjoys it. And so enjoying the good things about other people, I think, is really important, and it's the whole concept of breaking bread. Mm-hmm. The other thing is I have a friend, Larry Nez, who my wife Spring and I went to high school with. Larry is a member of the Navajo Nation, lives in Tuba City, Arizona. And Larry, when I went out to visit him and his family, gave me a gift of corn, traditional corn that he had grown. And so I started thinking about, well, what about indigenous foods and indigenous cooking? And I started working on it in my own simple way, growing things in our garden and reading about it. And so maybe I'll just show you some of the things that we've been growing at home. Mm-hmm. And then we can talk about some of the cookbooks that are actually out there for indigenous
that sounds
cooking.
Good, yeah.
So some of the things that I grow are corn. This is Abenaki variety of corn,
Okay.
and it's really quite beautiful. I think it's a red and a yellow. And then this year, not so successfully. I grew this variety of corn. It's brown in color, and this is an Osage Native American variety of corn.
So Osage would have been more
Osage is out
western?
on the plains.
Okay.
The Osage had a long migration, I think, through the Ohio Valley and into Missouri, southern Missouri, Kansas, and they're currently located today in the area of Pawhuska, Oklahoma.
Okay.
The other thing that we've been growing a lot of is our beans, and in this jar are some traditional Abenaki varieties of beans, and also there's a black and white bean. It's called Haudenosaunee skunk. That is a bean grown by the Iroquois for millennia. So I got interested in these different kinds of plants and interested in food preparation, and so along with actually growing plants and different kinds of corn and beans, I've also done some reading, and there are a couple of great books. This is one of them. It's called Our Ancestors, Recovering Our Ancestors' Garden. And this has a lot of great recipes in here, including one written by a friend of mine, Dr. Andrea Hunter, who is the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Osage Nation. And we're going to try one of her recipes this morning. The other one is this book that's come out, and it's by Sean Sherman, who is Lakota. And again, there are a lot of terrific recipes in here using additional indigenous foods, and he arranges them in very novel ways. So both of these books I would recommend for those who are interested. So some of the food preparation activities that I've been involved in include making wasna, which is done by drying bison meat, drying some kind of berry, choke cherry. In this case, I used this berry, which is a Saskatoon berry.
Okay.
And
now, where do you
then
get Saskatoon berries?
Saskatoon berries are up further north.
Yeah.
They're service berries. Choke cherries, I've harvested them around here and actually have used them to make wasna. Wasna in English is pemmican, and it's a typical way food. So these are all pounded together, and then kidney fat is mixed in to give them a consistency, holding the whole thing together. And the modern expression of wasna is found in this tonka bar. The tonka bar is really the modern answer to wasna pemmican, and it's produced by Lakota people at the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. So we're going to try the more traditional version. But one thing I want to emphasize for those who are interested in indigenous foods, it's also important to support Native communities in maybe accessing food products. Typically when I buy wild rice, I don't go to the supermarket to get it. I get this Beneshi wild rice. This is canoe collected, hand parched wild rice. And this wild rice is very, very different from the black wild rice, the cultivated wild rice you see in supermarkets. The flavor's better, the texture's better, and it supports an indigenous community. And wild rice, which is called manoman in Ojibwe. Wild rice is extremely important to the Ojibwe people. And one thing that we also need to understand when we're talking about food is not just about sustenance. There's also a spiritual and ceremonial side to
Okay.
it. And manoman is used ceremonially by the Ojibwe. So it's not just food, it's a whole world that's connected through food. This is another example, along with the Tonka bar of food that I had purchased through a Native American enterprise. This is hominy that is made by the Ojibwe people in Minnesota. So again, I think it's really important to want to understand people and want to understand them in a more deeper, profound way, but also to be supportive
Right.
of them.
Yeah.
So this morning, we're gonna walk through some of these indigenous foods, and I think I'll start with the wasna. So this is pemmican that I produced the other day. Again, it's dried bison, dried Saskatoon berries, and kidney fat. And I think you have a picture.
I have a picture of them drying.
Drying the bison meat, and then you have a picture of a woman actually preparing the berries and the meat by pounding.
The first one, and they dried by air. Basically.
By air.
Yeah.
And there's a very funny story that I have about drying. One year I was drying bison meat on the porch. Now I'm not fortunate enough to have weather conditions that would allow me to dry by air, so I use a dehydrator. And got a phone call from the neighbors saying that our resident black bear was on his way, and he's rather large, and I run into him in the woods, and I think we're on okay terms. Usually he turns and runs away, but he came through the yard, and I was watching him from the porch, and he suddenly realized that I was there.
He must have smelled it, though. Right?
Oh, that's the deal. And he turned around and ran when he realized I was standing there. So I went inside, forgetting about the fact that I had bison meat drying on the porch. And about 10 or 15 minutes later, he came back in the yard. And I thought, well, what's going on here? He came in from another direction. And then I said to Spring, my wife, I said, oh, no, I've got the bison meat on there. So I tore out onto the porch and got it, because I guarantee you the porch would have been a mess.
That's sort of like me driving by Allen Brothers and smelling the fresh donuts.
There
Same
you go. So I'd like to just try this morning. The picture
Yes,
you have
please.
there now shows a woman pounding the berries in the
So
meat.
it's everything's pounded together.
It's pounded
the
together,
dried
and
meat
then it's held
with the
together
berries.
with the kidney.
And when you say
fat.
kidney fat, it's not really fat in the kidney; it's fat found
That-
on the kidney.
It's around it. That's
Yeah,
right.
right.
And then you
Just
have to
letting you know,
you have to render it.
It's supposed to be like the best, finest
Yes.
fat in any animal, and especially. I've heard of deer people that is.
So
Let's get right hand it over here. That's good. Actually, it's surprisingly sweet.
It's sweet because of the Saskatoon berries.
Mm,
The
what?
berries, when they dry, concentrate the sugar, and it gives it a sweet flavor, much like
Yeah.
the cranberries and other fruits. I think there's an orange and apple variety that go in the Tonka bar. So in this, you've got meat, you've got berry, and you've got fat. I mean, suet, effectively. It's a wonderful combination, high energy food that is storable. It's
Yeah,
preserved.
so when you say whey food, it's not like whey like cheese and
When you're on
it's
the road.
on the road, dude. I'm on my way.
Exactly. And the thing that I would say about my experience with indigenous food, and of course, really to understand indigenous food, you need to talk to indigenous people. I'm not one of them, but the thing that I've really enjoyed is that, unlike food that we get in the supermarket, it is what it is. You're tasting all the flavors in that food.
Well, that's what I was actually going to say, is when I first bit into it, I just tasted the sweet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, this doesn't even taste like beef. It doesn't, like, there's no meat flavor
Mm-hmm.
to it. And then as I was chewing it, then
the
the bison
buffalo,
flavor
yeah.
came through.
Right.
And then I finally think the last thing that came through was probably the fat.
The fat.
The fat
Yeah,
flavor.
yeah. As it
So you
melts
got-
away, I can
yeah.
still taste the fat.
Yeah, you got the flavors. Simple flavors, but you got the flavors.
Simple flavors but flavors that are authentic. They're not adulterated. There's no salt in this other than what's in the the bison meat or the kidney fat, what would be
Whatever
in there naturally,
naturally,
and
yeah.
there's no sugar that was added
Right.
to this. The sweetness that you're getting is the sweetness of the dried Saskatoon berries, again, this will preserve for a considerable length of time, and I from time to time will make it, and I'll have it in the summer, and it really I really enjoy it. So that is Wasna.
Yeah.
I want to
Just before you go on, I
Yeah.
would throw you actually gave me some Tonka bars, and I ended up buying Tonka bars this summer, and they are really good.
They are, and they're better for you because
better
bison
than
meat has
any
a
other-
lot less
Yeah, well,
fat.
it's funny because that's like the new thing now. Like a lot of people in the gym, like they want something to quickly put quality protein into their system after they work out.
Right.
Without a lot of the protein bars are loaded with sugar. They're loaded with not necessarily clean ingredients. So I've seen a lot of people with Tonka, and then there's another brand. I
Yeah.
can't remember the other brand, but the bars.
Oh, they
the
have
bison
like
meat bars,
Epic and
Epic, Epic is the other
exactly.
bar. Yeah.
But
Is
if you
Epic-
look at it and think it's going to be like gas station beef jerky, it
It's
is
not.
No, not at all. Not
It
at all.
is really-
And that's,
it's really
it's
different.
high quality
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
what it is. It's
Yeah.
high quality and it's better for you and it takes, in my opinion, authentic taste.
It's also more easily digestible and then usable. When
Right.
you have something like that that is a better quality and is cleaner, your body's going to use it more quickly. It's kind of and use it more efficiently than with all the
Junk in
the
it.
junk in it. Yeah.
And I think, Marty, you raised a really good point, and I mean that's one of the interesting things about our discussion today is that we're all involved in one way or another in the gym, and it's all about maybe a healthier lifestyle, and really these kinds of foods and their simplicity and quality are all about that, and that is something that we need to acknowledge. In regards to Native American people. So the next little recipe I want to try here came to me from a Cherokee colleague of mine, Dr. Barker Ferris, and this is knutschi. Now, knutschi is hickory nut soup, and Mike, you have a few photos of a Cherokee woman actually pounding the hickory nuts in a wooden mortar. And I have a wooden mortar at home, but I don't that I made, but I didn't use it to grind these nuts. And there's a picture of a Cherokee woman with her basket of nuts and the knutschi ball itself. And then I think the last slide you have is the knutschi ball that you're going to eat this morning. I really like knutschi, and I flavored the knutschi with some corn and a little bit of bacon, so a little bit of license there. But again, this is a wonderful soup, and it's very thick, very nutritious.
You
And
surprised
I
me,
really
'cause
like
it.
it.
Didn't look that thick when I was looking at it from the
So those were the nut. You had some nuts on the. You have some nuts right next. Those
These
are
are
those
actually
the nuts.
these are actually prairie turnips,
okay.
Timsala.
Oh,
and if
okay.
we hadn't had the power outage, I would have made wojapi for you,
Oh,
and I
come
would
on,
have
the
thickened
power
with
outage.
that.
The Indians didn't have power.
Yeah, we were going to talk to you
We were
about
gonna
that.
talk
I
about
think
Well,
it.
you
we're
know.
popping out a little bit here.
So that's
That is
knutschi.
delicious again.
That is very, very hearty.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
hearty, but
I,
has like an al dente. Is that the corn? Or is
the
that
corn and
yeah.
the bacon. So really, you get your hickory nuts. They're very
Oh, yeah,
sweet.
it's very
You pound
nutty.
them up.
Yeah.
You put them into a softball sized bowl. You can freeze them if you
Mm-hmm.
want to. And then when you're ready to cook, you boil water. You can cook your bacon and then put water in, boil your water, put the corn in, and put the hickory nuts in. I think it's a fabulous soup. And again, the flavors are all there.
Yeah.
They all hit you. They're not masked by some
really.
adulterated chemicals or sugar or whatnot. So we had a little bit of a starter. We had the main course. I'd like to go to the next thing, which is found in one of the cookbooks, Recovering Our Ancestors' Gardens. This recipe I got from my friend Dr. Andrea Hunter, who is the Osage Tribal Historic Preservation Officer in Pawhuska, Oklahoma. And she has a recipe in the book that talks about making persimmon cakes by cooking them on a wooden plank that's been greased with bison fat. So you grease it and you actually put it in the fire, and this sort of very gloppy, almost gelatinous persimmon, which you've taken the seeds out of, actually forms a cake. And again, it will preserve for some time, and I find it to be very interesting and delicious. And again, there's nothing in this. There's nothing in this except the persimmons themselves that have been baked on the board.
On the board.
In the bison fat, right?
With bison fat
as
kind of protecting the board
Yeah, it's
from
like
burning.
greasing the pan when you're baking
Now you'll
cookies.
taste a little bit of the astringency in the outer side of the persimmon, but very sweet. And Dr. Hunter said to me, we were talking about, I asked her, do the Osage people put anything on these, like a honey or something, and of course maple syrup, but that's not so much the Osage geography. And she said no. And I thought what was very interesting was she said that people have a different sense of sweet. So when you and I think of sweet, we think of a candy bar. Well, for indigenous people, and undoubtedly our ancestors, I mean, at one point we were all indigenous,
Right.
and we were living as hunter-gatherers back in the Paleolithic. And so, it was interesting to me because you would have had access to things like potentially sap, which has a little bit of sweetness in it, honey, indigenous people, collect and use honey. But the sweetness would have been in things like this, and it's a very different level of sweetness. It's not that super sugar dose, and
No, it tastes very light.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a really nice light.
Which is interesting because we have so trained our palates, like to be so oversweet that normally
Or over salty.
salty that if you taste something like that, you're like, well, it's really not that sweet.
right.
So I understand what you're saying in that they didn't have an overly developed hypersensitive sweet palate.
Palate
so for
that way,
them,
right.
that was
But no,
that
that's
was
really good.
that was sweet. That wasn't not sweet.
And it reminds me of a show my wife Spring watches, a cooking show, The Great British Bake Off, and one of the judges was arguing with the contestant that you've made this so sweet you can't taste the fruit that you used anymore. And so once again, these are real flavors, very simply constructed, very simply presented, but absolutely wonderful. And so that's really been my experience. I continue to work on this, and there are other things that I do. But I wanted to just talk today about these different foods.
Amazing. And how do I say this? Because I did talk with Spring, and she was like, these are pretty bland. And I don't think they're bland at all. I think they're very flavorful.
No, she and my children, Noelle and Petra.
Well, they're probably more exposed to it.
They kind of see it that way. But again, I think it's what Marty just said. In our social setting, in modern day United States, we have an idea of what things should be, and we've lost something.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
what we've lost is that simplicity, that honesty in food. It isn't drowned in some kind of flavoring. this is real food, and I think that getting back to that kind of thing is probably enhancing the experience of eating, but also getting back to healthier eating.
Oh, I agree.
Definitely healthier eating.
But it
Simpler
definitely
foods.
tastes. I think the flavors, especially the I can't say, but the pemmican.
The
I thought
pemmican,
was,
yeah.
pemmican
The
was just.
wasna, yeah.
Wasna was just, just like you said, it was
The
like
layers
They
of
were
you-
like
you-
boom, boom,
you
and it
went through the
really
layers.
worked on your palate. Incredibly good.
Yeah, so it started for me, as I said earlier, as an experiment. Part of what I do. As this program knows, I make stone tools. I use stone tools. Actually, I'll be out hunting with them this weekend.
Really? You gonna go?
Oh yeah, with a form of point that's a composite reindeer antler and stone point.
You're gonna have to come back and
I have
tell
talked
us
to
about
the
some
I
of
have
your
talked to the game
experience.
warden about that. Don't want to fall afoul of the law. But this started as an exercise for me in trying to understand how food was prepared. By indigenous peoples and in my own remote past. And it's been quite a journey through, several friends,
Right.
Larry Nez, Dr. Barker Ferris, Dr. Andrea Hunter, and it's been a real connection for me.
And then, and I guess one quick question, because we're almost out of time, but they were hunter-gatherers, right? So what you've shown us today doesn't require, it really, you could move with all of these things.
Yes.
Because, and they don't require refrigeration, they don't require, probably dry, cool air would just be well enough. But what proportion was from the hunters and what proportion was from the gatherers?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think there's always this statement in archaeology, man the hunter. But when you really get to know indigenous communities and look at ethnography, gathering is probably the more significant activity. Hunting was important, but there is a whole cornucopia out there.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's in our woods. Like I told
Right.
you, I go hunt chaga, which I make tea out of. But I did want to end very
here we go.
quickly with the most interesting thing that I had. My good friend and colleague Marcel Pelletier, who is Soto, so he's Plains Ojibwe, kindly invited me to the Enoch Cree Nation Sundance earlier in the year, and I was deeply honored by that. When I was there, the Cree people, the Cree First Nations people, who were hosting the Sundance at the Enoch Cree Nation Reserve outside of Edmonton. Part of it is giving gifts of food and eating, and one of the things that I got to eat, and I was very excited about it, was moose nose soup.
Ooh.
And it was soup made apparently in a very special recipe using the meat, I guess, associated with the head of the moose, and it was flavored only with the Saskatoon berries.
Really?
And I had this soup, and it had meat in it, and it was sort of on the liquid side and brown, and there was a Saskatoon berry or two floating in it. And when I went back to the camp where we stayed when the ceremony wasn't actually going on, I asked Marcel's wife, Connie, was that moose nose soup? And she said, yes, it was. So I was thrilled to be able to try that because it was very unusual. So
Well, great.
Not
And I
usually
think
on the menu locally.
yes.
probably not. No.
Maybe at the
And
end of-
maybe unfortunately not.
Yeah. Yes. Okay,
So-
well, that's it for us this week. Who would you have?
Next week we have Kathleen Gavatsky from Halliday. She's going to come on and talk about all the things going on for Shop Local and downtown BF, and also all the things she has going on at Halliday's.
Chris, thank you so
Thank
much.
you
It's
so much.
always fascinating when you
welcome.
come on. It's great. I hope we can come on and after you do your hunt, we can maybe talk
Well,
about
we
that.
can talk about that.
Yeah. All right. And that's it for
Bye,
us. We'll
community.
see you next week on the feed.
Bye.
Thanks.
Yep.
That's it, folks, for the feed. Be sure to catch us every Wednesdays at 7:30 a.m. Also, find us on Facebook at Fact TV or tell us what you think. TheFeed8 at gmail.com. And don't forget to watch the feed online at www.factdate.com.